The cold winter night at Boston Memorial Hospital was pierced by the shrill sound of the emergency alarm at precisely 3 a.m. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the quiet corridors as medical staff rushed through the emergency department, their footsteps echoing against the polished floors. Dr. Emily Roberts had just finished her rounds when the call came in. She was exhausted, having worked a double shift, but something in the nurse's voice made her pause. Emily's dark curly hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her white coat pristine despite the long hours. At 35, she had become one of the hospital's most respected neurosurgeons, though the journey hadn't been easy. The emergency room doors burst open as the paramedics wheeled in a woman on a stretcher. Blood stained the white sheets, and medical equipment beeped urgently. Emily felt her heart skip a beat as she approached, clipboard in hand. The patient's face was barely visible beneath the oxygen mask, but Emily would have known those perfectly manicured nails anywhere. Patricia Whittaker. The name on the chart seemed to jump out at her. For 3 years, Patricia had been Emily's worst nightmare. The wealthy socialite had made it her mission to discredit Emily and other minority doctors of the hospital. She had started with complaints to the medical board, claiming Emily had made mistakes during routine procedures. When those were dismissed, Patricia escalated her campaign. Emily remembered the cruel social media posts, the protesters Patricia had rallied outside the hospital, the way she'd followed Emily to her car after late shifts, shouting that she was unqualified and dangerous. The harassment had gotten so bad that Emily had considered leaving Boston altogether. Now, Patricia lay unconscious before her, the CT scan showing a severe brain hemorrhage that required immediate surgery. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the images. The bleeding was extensive, and the location was precarious. One wrong move could leave Patricia paralyzed or worse. "Page Dr. Henderson." Emily called out to a nearby nurse, hoping the senior surgeon would be available. The nurse shook her head. "He's at a conference in Chicago until tomorrow. Dr. Williams is down with the flu, and Dr. Chen is in the middle of another emergency surgery." Emily felt the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. She was the only neurosurgeon available who had experience with this particular type of procedure. The surgery needed to happen within the next hour, or Patricia would likely not survive. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Emily. The woman who had tried to destroy her career now depended on her skills to survive. Emily could feel the eyes of the emergency room staff on her, waiting for her decision. They all knew about Patricia's campaign against her. A young resident touched Emily's arm. "Dr. Roberts, we could try to transfer her to Metro General. They might have someone available." Emily looked at Patricia's vital signs, which were growing more unstable by the minute. "She wouldn't survive the transfer," she said quietly. The truth of those words hung heavy in the air. As Emily stood there, memories flooded back. She remembered sitting in her car crying after particularly harsh encounters with Patricia. She thought about her mother's words when she was growing up. "Being a doctor means helping everyone, even those who don't deserve it." The monitor began beeping more urgently. Patricia's blood pressure was dropping. Emily straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. "Prep or 3, she commanded, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I want her ready for surgery in 15 minutes." The staff sprang into action, some looking relieved, others surprised. As they wheeled Patricia toward the operating room, Emily caught a glimpse of a small photo that had fallen from the woman's purse, a smiling Patricia with what looked like her grandchildren. In the scrub room, Emily methodically washed her hands, the familiar routine helping to center her thoughts. She could hear the nurses preparing the operating room behind her, the clinking of instruments and the murmur of voices creating a familiar symphony. Dr. James Wilson, her trusted anesthesiologist, joined her at the sink. "You don't have to do this, Emily," he said softly. "No one would blame you for stepping aside." Emily looked at her reflection in the window separating the scrub room from the OR. She saw the determined face of a doctor who had fought against prejudice and discrimination her entire career. She saw someone who had earned her position through years of hard work and dedication. "Yes, I do have to do this," she replied. "Not for her, but for everything I believe in. For every young girl who dreams of becoming a doctor and is told she can't. For every patient who needs to trust that their doctor will help them, no matter what." The scrub nurse helped Emily into her surgical gown and gloves. As she entered the operating room, the familiar scent of antiseptic filled her nostrils. Patricia lay draped on the table, her face now hidden behind surgical sheets. Only a small section of her skull was visible, marked for the incision. Emily looked around at her team. Nurses, technicians, and assistants who had worked with her countless times before. They all knew what was at stake. Not just a life, but a principle. "Time to save a life," Emily said, holding out her hand for the scalpel. "Let's show everyone what quality healthcare really looks like." The overhead lights blazed bright as Emily made the first incision, her hands no longer trembling. In that moment, she wasn't operating on Patricia Whittaker, the woman who had harassed her. She was operating on a human being who needed her help, and that was all that mattered. As the monitors beeped steadily in the background, Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had trained for this. She had earned this. And now she would prove why she deserved to be exactly where she was, not through words or arguments, but through the skilled work of her hands and the dedication in her heart. The clock on the wall ticked past 3:30 a.m. as Emily began the delicate procedure that would determine not just Patricia's fate, but perhaps the future of their shared story. 3 months before that fateful night in the operating room, Emily had been walking to her car after a long shift when she first noticed the expensive black Mercedes following her. The autumn leaves crunched under her feet as she quickened her pace, her heart racing. The car's headlights cast long shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. It was Patricia Whittaker again. The wealthy hospital board member had been escalating her harassment campaign for weeks, but this was different. This felt dangerous. Emily clutched her keys tightly, remembering how it had all started. A simple complaint about wait times had somehow turned into a crusade. Patricia had first approached the hospital administration, claiming that Emily had been rude and unprofessional during a routine consultation. When the review found no wrongdoing, Patricia's attacks became more personal. The social media posts began appearing shortly after. Emily remembered sitting in her office, staring at her computer screen in disbelief as she read Patricia's public Facebook statements. Would you trust your life to someone who probably only got their position through quotas? The posts always stopped just short of naming Emily directly, but everyone knew who Patricia was talking about. Then came the YouTube videos. Patricia, perfectly coiffed and speaking with practiced calm, would stand in front of Boston Memorial Hospital, warning people about the dangerous lowering of standards in medical hiring. She never explicitly mentioned race, but her meaning was clear in every carefully chosen word. Emily's colleagues tried to support her, but they couldn't stop the whispers in the hallways or the sideways glances from some patients. Dr. James Wilson had found her crying in the break room one evening after a particularly brutal day. "You can't let her win," he had said, handing her a tissue. "You're twice the doctor she'll ever understand." But the campaign took its toll. Emily started second-guessing every decision, triple-checking every chart. The confidence she had built over 15 years of practice began to crack. She lost sleep, lost weight, and nearly lost herself. The protests were what finally pushed Emily to her breaking point. Patricia had organized a small but vocal group to stand outside the hospital with signs questioning the hospital's hiring practices. Local news crews showed up, drawn by the controversy. Emily had to enter through the back entrance, feeling like a criminal in her own workplace. One rainy Tuesday morning, Emily had arrived at work to find her office door plastered with printouts of negative patient reviews, all fake, all clearly orchestrated by Patricia. As she pulled them down, her hands shaking, Emily noticed her nameplate had been defaced. Something inside her broke that day. She submitted her resignation letter that afternoon. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the chief of surgery, had refused to accept it. "This is exactly what she wants," Sarah had said, pushing the letter back across her desk. "You've worked too hard to let someone's hatred destroy your career." But it wasn't just about Emily anymore. Patricia had begun targeting other minority doctors at the hospital. Dr. Rodriguez in pediatrics found his patient schedule mysteriously empty after Patricia visited her regular mommy group. Dr. Chen in cardiology had his credentials questioned publicly on Patricia's growing social media platform. Emily remembered the day she finally decided to fight back. She was treating a young black girl who wanted to be a doctor. The child looked at Emily with such hope, such admiration. "You look like me," the girl had said, beaming. "Mom says that means I can be a doctor too." That evening, Emily filed for a restraining order against Patricia. She documented every incident, every post, every act of harassment. The hospital's legal team finally got involved, threatening Patricia with legal action if she continued her campaign. Patricia's response was to double down. She hired lawyers of her own, claiming she was just concerned about patient safety. She started showing up at medical board meetings, questioning every case Emily had ever handled. Each accusation was disproven, but the investigations took time and emotional energy. The stalking began soon after. Patricia would wait in the parking lot, following Emily home in her black Mercedes. She would show up at restaurants where Emily was dining with friends, sitting nearby and staring. She even appeared at Emily's neighborhood grocery store, accidentally bumping into her cart and spilling its contents. Emily installed security cameras at her home. She varied her routes to work. She stopped going out with friends, afraid of bringing Patricia's harassment into their lives. Her world began to shrink, defined by the spaces she felt safe. Other doctors started taking sides. Most supported Emily, but some quietly suggested that maybe she should transfer to another hospital, for everyone's sake. The division was exactly what Patricia wanted. The breaking point came when Patricia somehow got Emily's personal phone number. The calls started at all hours, always from blocked numbers, always silent. Emily changed her number 3 times, but Patricia always found a way. One night, exhausted and at her limit, Emily had found a note on her car windshield. "You don't belong here," it read in Patricia's elegant handwriting. "You never will." Emily had taken the note home and pinned it to her bulletin board. Every morning, she looked at it before leaving for work, not as a reminder of Patricia's hatred, but as a reminder of what she was fighting against, not just for herself, but for every doctor who would come after her. The harassment had almost broken her spirit, had almost cost her everything she'd worked for, but somehow it had also made her stronger. Each day she stayed, each patient she helped, each surgery she performed successfully was an act of resistance. Now, 3 months later, as Emily watched Patricia's car following her through the parking lot one last time, she didn't feel fear anymore. She felt pity for someone whose heart was so filled with hatred that they would dedicate their life to destroying others. Little did either woman know that fate was about to force them together in the most unexpected way. In an operating room where all that would matter were Emily's skilled hands and her oath to help anyone in need, even those who had tried to destroy her. In the bright lights of the operating room, Emily's hands moved with practiced precision as she navigated the delicate tissues of Patricia's brain. 3 hours had passed since she began the surgery, each moment requiring intense focus and unwavering confidence. The steady beep of the heart monitor provided a rhythm to her work. As she operated, memories of her journey flooded back. Her mother working extra shifts to put her through medical school. The advisors who suggested she consider an easier specialty. The patients who requested a different doctor before even giving her a chance. Each challenge had built something inside her, not anger, but a quiet, unshakable strength. Dr. Wilson monitored Patricia's vitals from his position at the head of the table. "Blood pressure's holding steady," he reported, his voice muffled behind his surgical mask. Emily nodded, her eyes never leaving the surgical field. The OR team worked in practiced harmony around her. Nurse Thompson anticipated her needs, placing instruments in her hand before she asked. Surgical Tech Roberts kept the field clear and organized. They had all witnessed Patricia's campaign against Emily, and now they watched in admiration as their colleague fought to save her tormentor's life. A critical moment approached. Emily needed to navigate past a cluster of vital blood vessels to reach the bleeding. One wrong move could have devastating consequences. The room grew even quieter, the tension palpable. Emily took a deep breath, remembering her training. She thought about her mentor, Dr. Martinez, who had taught her that surgical skill wasn't just about steady hands. It was about steady nerves and an unwavering belief in oneself. "I need a little more light," Emily said calmly. The surgical lamp adjusted, illuminating the crucial area. As she worked, Emily reflected on the irony of the situation. Patricia had spent months trying to prove Emily was incompetent, and now Emily's competence was the only thing standing between Patricia and death. The bleeding vessel came into view. Emily's movements were deliberate and precise as she carefully worked to repair it. Years of training and experience guided her hands. She had performed this procedure dozens of times, but never under such emotional circumstances. A memory surfaced of her father's words when she first faced discrimination in medical school. "Let your work speak for itself. Excellence is the best answer to ignorance." She had lived by those words, pushing herself to be not just good, but exceptional. The OR clock ticked past the 4-hour mark. Emily's back ached from standing in the same position, but her concentration never wavered. She had learned early in her career that physical discomfort was a small price to pay for precision. Nurse Thompson wiped Emily's brow with a sterile cloth. It was a small gesture of support, one that spoke volumes about the team's respect for their colleague. They had all seen Emily maintain her professionalism throughout Patricia's harassment, never lowering herself to retaliation. As Emily worked to close the surgical site, she thought about the countless times she had doubted herself during Patricia's campaign. The sleepless nights questioning if she was good enough, if she belonged. But here, in the operating room, there was no room for doubt. Here, she was exactly who she was meant to be. A skilled surgeon saving a life. The final sutures went in with the same care as the first. Emily stepped back, surveying her work. The bleeding had been controlled, the pressure relieved. Now it was up to Patricia's body to heal. "Surgery completed," Emily announced, her voice clear and strong. Time, 7 hours, 23 minutes. As the team began their post-operative procedures, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. She had done what she had trained to do, what she had sworn to do when she took the Hippocratic Oath. Personal feelings had no place in the operating room. Dr. Wilson approached her as she scrubbed out. "That was masterful work," he said quietly. "You just saved the life of someone who tried to destroy yours. That takes more than skill. It takes character." Emily smiled tiredly as she dried her hands. "We don't get to choose our patients," she replied. "But we do get to choose who we are when we treat them." The surgical team filed out, each member nodding respectfully to Emily as they passed. They had witnessed more than just a successful surgery. They had seen the triumph of professionalism over prejudice, of duty over personal grievance. As Emily updated Patricia's chart, she realized that something had shifted inside her. The fear and self-doubt that had plagued her during months of harassment had been replaced by something stronger, an unshakable confidence in her abilities and her right to be exactly where she was. Patricia would live, thanks to the very skills and dedication she had spent months attacking. When she woke up, she would have to confront not just her recovery, but the reality that her life had been saved by someone she had tried so hard to discredit. Emily gathered her things, ready to finally rest after the marathon surgery. As she walked through the quiet hospital corridors, her footsteps echoed with a new certainty. She had faced her greatest test, not in proving herself to others, but in staying true to her principles when it would have been easier to walk away. The night sky was beginning to lighten as Emily stepped outside. A new day was dawning, and with it, perhaps, a chance for both women to learn from this unexpected twist of fate. Sometimes, she reflected, the greatest strength lies not in confronting our enemies, but in rising above the very concept of enemies to simply do what is right. The recovery room was quiet except for the gentle beeping of monitors when Patricia began to stir. Emily stood at the nurse's station, completing her post-operative notes when the call came. Patricia was waking up, 12 hours after the surgery that had saved her life. As Emily approached the recovery bed, she noticed how small and vulnerable Patricia looked, so different from the imposing figure who had tormented her for months. The woman's normally perfect hair was tangled, her face pale against the white hospital pillows. Dr. James Wilson was already at Patricia's bedside, checking her vital signs. "All her numbers look good," he reported quietly to Emily. "The initial neurological responses are promising." Patricia's eyes fluttered open, confusion evident in her gaze as she tried to focus on her surroundings. Emily stepped forward, maintaining a professional demeanor as she shined a small light into Patricia's eyes, checking her pupil response. "Mrs. Whittaker, you're in the recovery room at Boston Memorial," Emily explained calmly. "You had emergency surgery for a brain hemorrhage. Can you squeeze my hand?" Patricia's fingers weakly gripped Emily's hand. A good sign. As recognition dawned in Patricia's eyes, Emily saw something she had never witnessed before in the woman's face. Fear. Dr. Roberts." Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. You operated on me." Before Emily could respond, a tall man in an expensive suit burst into the recovery room. Robert Whittaker, Patricia's husband, looked between his wife and Emily with evident shock. He had been just as vocal in the campaign against Emily as his wife. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, pointing at Emily. "I want another doctor." Nurse Chen stepped forward protectively, but Emily raised a hand to stop her. "Mr. Whittaker," she said evenly, "your wife came in with a critical brain hemorrhage last night. I was the only neurosurgeon available qualified to perform the necessary procedure. The surgery was successful, and your wife's initial recovery signs are positive." Robert Whittaker's face reddened. "You expect me to believe? She saved my life." Patricia's weak voice cut through her husband's anger. "Robert, please." The room fell silent. Emily continued her post-operative examination, checking Patricia's responses and motor functions. Each positive response added to the evidence that the surgery had been a complete success. As Emily worked, she noticed Patricia watching her with different eyes, not with the contempt and suspicion of before, but with something that looked like wonder and perhaps shame. "Why?" Patricia finally whispered. "After everything, why did you help me?" Emily paused in her examination. The question hung in the air, heavy with months of harassment and pain. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. "Because that's what doctors do," Emily replied simply. "We help people who need help. All people." Tears began rolling down Patricia's cheeks. Her husband shifted uncomfortably, his earlier anger deflating as he watched his wife break down. "I was so wrong," Patricia managed between sobs. "So terribly wrong. The things I said, the things I did." Emily checked the last of Patricia's vital signs before responding. "Mrs. Whittaker, right now you need to focus on your recovery. We can discuss other matters when you're stronger." But Patricia reached out, catching Emily's wrist with surprising strength. "No, please. I need to say this now. I spent months trying to destroy your career because of my own prejudices, and when I needed help most, you saved my life." The monitors beeped steadily in the background as Patricia continued, her voice growing stronger. "I've spent my life judging people based on things that don't matter. I never bothered to see the skill, the dedication, the humanity." Robert Whittaker had sunk into a chair, his face in his hands. The nurses and Dr. Wilson stood quietly, witnesses to a transformation none of them had expected. Emily gently removed Patricia's hand from her wrist. Every patient who comes through those emergency room doors deserves the best care we can provide. That's not just my belief. It's my oath. Patricia nodded slowly, more tears falling. I understand that now. Maybe I had to be the patient to finally see it. The moment was interrupted by Dr. Mitchell, the chief of surgery, entering the room. She had heard about the night's events and came to check on both patient and surgeon. Dr. Roberts, she said warmly, excellent work last night. Mrs. Whitaker, you were fortunate to have one of our finest surgeons available when you needed help. Patricia looked at Dr. Mitchell, then back at Emily. Yes, she said softly. I'm beginning to understand just how fortunate I was. As Emily prepared to leave, allowing Patricia to rest, she heard the woman call out once more. Dr. Roberts, thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for showing me what real strength looks like. Emily nodded acknowledgement before stepping out into the hallway. As she walked away, she heard Patricia talking to her husband, her voice carrying clearly through the door. We have to make this right, Robert. All of it. The next few days would reveal whether Patricia's change of heart was genuine or merely the result of post-operative gratitude. But for now, Emily had done what she had trained to do. She had saved a life, and perhaps helped heal something more than just a physical wound. As she headed to check on her other patients, Emily felt lighter somehow. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating our opponents, but from showing them a better way forward. 5 hours into the intricate brain surgery, Emily's skilled hands carefully navigated the complex network of blood vessels when something unusual caught her eye. Just beyond the hemorrhage site, she noticed an abnormal mass of tissue that shouldn't have been there. Can we get a closer look at this area? Emily asked, her voice steady despite her growing concern. The surgical microscope adjusted, bringing the suspicious region into sharp focus. Dr. Wilson leaned forward from his position at the anesthesia station. What are you seeing? Emily's heart began to race as the implications became clear. The mass was pressing against Patricia's frontal lobe, the area of the brain responsible for personality, decision-making, and emotional control. The location and appearance suggested it had been growing there for months, perhaps even a year. There's a tumor, Emily announced to the surgical team. Small but significant. It's pressing on the areas that control behavior and emotional regulation. The nurses exchanged glances. Everyone in that operating room knew about Patricia's campaign of harassment against Emily. Now they were witnessing a possible explanation for the wealthy woman's dramatic personality change. Emily remembered conversations with other hospital staff about how Patricia had been different before. Some of the longer-serving nurses had mentioned that she used to be known for her charity work and kindness to staff. The change had seemed to come out of nowhere. Dr. Roberts, the surgical resident assisting her, spoke up. Should we take a biopsy? Emily nodded, her mind racing through the implications. Prepare the equipment. We need to know what we're dealing with. As they waited for the biopsy tools, Emily thought back to all the confrontations with Patricia over the past year. The increasing aggression, the irrational behavior, the sudden fixation on targeting minority doctors, all possible symptoms of a brain tumor affecting her personality. The biopsy confirmed Emily's suspicions. The tumor, while likely benign, was positioned in a way that was affecting Patricia's behavior. The pressure it was creating could explain the personality changes, the aggressive outbursts, and the irrational fixations. Her husband mentioned she had been having headaches. Nurse Thompson recalled quietly. She brushed them off as stress-related. Emily felt a complex mix of emotions as she continued working to save Patricia's life. The woman who had made her life miserable for months wasn't entirely responsible for her actions. The tumor had been silently affecting her behavior, turning her into someone she wasn't. As Emily carefully worked to remove both the tumor and address the hemorrhage, she thought about how fragile human personality could be. A small growth in the wrong place could transform a kind person into someone unrecognizable. Blood pressure's holding steady, Dr. Wilson reported. We're good to continue. The next 2 hours were intense as Emily meticulously removed the tumor while ensuring no damage was done to the surrounding healthy tissue. Each movement had to be precise, each decision carefully considered. The surgical team worked in focused silence, understanding the gravity of what they had discovered. This wasn't just about saving Patricia's life anymore. It was about giving her a chance to return to her true self. Emily remembered the photos she had seen in Patricia's file, images of her at hospital charity events from 2 years ago, smiling and presenting checks to the children's ward. That was before the tumor, before the change. Final piece removed, Emily announced as she carefully lifted the last of the tumor tissue away. "Let's close up and get her to recovery." As the team began the closing procedures, Emily couldn't help but think about how this discovery would affect both their lives. Patricia would wake up to learn not only that the doctor she had tormented had saved her life, but that her actions might not have entirely been her own. The weight of this knowledge settled on Emily's shoulders. She would need to explain everything to Patricia's family, help them understand that the woman they had watched change over the past year had been affected by an undiagnosed medical condition. "Dr. Roberts," the resident said softly as they finished up, "this changes everything, doesn't it?" Emily nodded slowly. "It changes how we understand what happened, but it doesn't change what we do next. We focus on her recovery and helping her heal, both physically and emotionally." As they wheeled Patricia to recovery, Emily began preparing for what would be an equally challenging task: helping Patricia and her family come to terms with the truth. The road ahead would be difficult, but understanding the medical cause of Patricia's behavior offered a chance for healing that went beyond the physical. Emily stayed late that night, writing detailed notes about the surgery and her findings. She wanted to ensure everything was documented clearly for the discussions that would follow. As she wrote, she realized that this discovery had given her something unexpected: a sense of peace about the months of harassment she had endured. Sometimes, she reflected, the greatest revelations come when we least expect them, turning enemies into patience and hatred into understanding. The human brain, with all its complexity, had taught them all a powerful lesson about judgment and compassion. As Emily finally prepared to leave the hospital, she paused by Patricia's recovery room. The woman was sleeping peacefully, unaware of how her life was about to change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, there was just the quiet victory of a successful surgery and the hope for a better future for both of them. 3 days after the surgery, Emily was checking patient charts when a nurse rushed to find her. Patricia Whittaker was waking up. The morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows as Emily made her way to the recovery room, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Patricia's room was filled with flowers and cards from family members. Her husband Robert sat beside her bed, holding her hand as her eyes slowly opened. Emily noticed immediately that something was different in Patricia's gaze. The harsh, angry look that had become so familiar over the past year was gone. "Good morning, Mrs. Whittaker," Emily said professionally, approaching the bed. "I'm Dr. Roberts. Do you remember where you are?" Patricia's eyes focused on Emily's face, and tears immediately began forming. "Dr. Roberts, yes, I remember. You saved my life." Her voice was weak but clear, carrying none of the contempt that had characterized their previous interactions. Emily began her neurological examination, checking Patricia's responses and cognitive function. Each test showed promising results, not just physically, but in the clarity and calmness of Patricia's responses. "Mrs. Whittaker, I need to discuss something important with you and your husband," Emily said, pulling up a chair. "During your surgery, we discovered a tumor pressing against your frontal lobe, the part of your brain that controls personality and behavior." Robert straightened in his chair, his face showing shock. Patricia squeezed his hand tighter as Emily continued. "The tumor's location explains the personality changes you've experienced over the past year. The aggressive behavior, the sudden fixations, the emotional outbursts, these weren't entirely you. They were symptoms of the pressure the tumor was putting on your brain." Patricia's free hand moved to cover her mouth as tears flowed freely down her cheeks. "The things I did, The horrible things I said and did to you and the other doctors. The tumor was affecting your judgment and emotional control, Emily explained gently. We removed it completely during the surgery. Your prognosis is good, both physically and mentally. Robert was crying now too. We watched you change, he said to his wife. You became someone we didn't recognize. I should have insisted on getting you checked when the headache started. Patricia turned her attention back to Emily, her eyes filled with remorse. How can you even stand to be in the same room with me? After everything I did to you, the complaints, the protests, the harassment. Emily checked Patricia's vital signs before responding. I'm your doctor. My job is to help you heal, regardless of the past. But I tried to destroy your career, Patricia whispered. I made your life miserable for months. I was so wrong, so terribly wrong. How can you forgive such hatred? The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. Emily considered her response carefully. Mrs. Whittaker, forgiveness isn't something that happens in a moment. It's a process. What matters now is that you're healing, and you have the chance to move forward with a clear mind and heart. Patricia's daughter Jane entered the room then, stopping short when she saw the emotional scene before her. She had distanced herself from her mother during the worst of her behavior, unable to understand the change in the woman who had raised her to believe in equality and kindness. Mom. Jane approached cautiously. Are you really you again? Patricia reached for her daughter with a trembling hand. Oh, Jane, I'm so sorry. I must have hurt you so much. As mother and daughter embraced, Emily quietly updated the medical chart, giving the family a moment of privacy. The reunion was interrupted by Dr. Mitchell, the chief of surgery, entering the room. Mrs. Whittaker, Dr. Mitchell said warmly, I'm glad to see you recovering well. Dr. Roberts did exceptional work in identifying and addressing both your immediate crisis and the underlying condition. Patricia wiped her eyes, looking between the two doctors. I need to make this right, she said firmly. I can't undo what I did, but I can try to make amends. Focus on your recovery first, Emily advised. You've been through major surgery. Everything else can wait until you're stronger. But Patricia shook her head. No, this can't wait. The hospital board needs to know the truth. Every complaint I filed, every protest I organized, it all needs to be officially withdrawn. And I want to make a public statement about what happened. Robert squeezed his wife's hand. We'll make it right, dear. Together. Emily watched as the family continued their emotional reunion, seeing the woman Patricia must have been before the tumor, kind, determined, and strong in a very different way than the angry person she had become. As she prepared to leave the room, Patricia called out one more time, Dr. Roberts, thank you, not just for saving my life, but for showing me what true professionalism and compassion look like. I hope someday I can earn your forgiveness. Emily paused at the door. Mrs. Whittaker, you already took the first step, acknowledging the truth and wanting to make things right. The rest will come with time. As Emily walked away from the room, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Sometimes healing went far beyond the physical, touching lives in ways that no one could have predicted. The coming days would bring challenges as Patricia worked to make amends, but for now, there was the simple victory of seeing a person restored to their true self. 1 month after the surgery, Emily stood backstage at a major medical conference in Boston, reviewing her notes. The audience of doctors, nurses, and medical students filled the auditorium, drawn by the remarkable story that had made headlines across the country. Patricia waited nearby, looking nervous but determined in her elegant suit. The past month had been transformative for both women. After Patricia's recovery, she had worked tirelessly to make amends, not just through words, but through actions. Ladies and gentlemen, the conference moderator announced, please welcome Dr. Emily Roberts and Mrs. Patricia Whittaker. As they walked onto the stage together, Emily remembered the day Patricia had appeared at the hospital board meeting, still recovering but insistent on telling her story. She had withdrawn every complaint, explained about the tumor, and pledged to use her influence to fight against discrimination in healthcare. Our story begins with prejudice. Patricia started, her voice strong and clear, but it becomes something much more important, a lesson about judgment, compassion, and the power of healing. Emily took her turn at the microphone, describing the medical aspects of the case. The audience listened intently as she explained how the tumor had affected Patricia's behavior and how its discovery had changed everything. But the real miracle, Emily continued, wasn't just the surgery. It was what happened afterward. Patricia stepped forward again. I had spent months attacking Dr. Roberts and other minority doctors, driven by a hatred I didn't understand. When I woke up after surgery, it was like emerging from a dark fog. The person I had become wasn't the real me. The transformation of their relationship had caught public attention. Local news covered Patricia's public apology and her new mission to combat discrimination in healthcare. National media picked up the story, fascinated by its themes of redemption and forgiveness. Together, they had established the Second Chance Initiative, a program helping hospitals identify and address bias in healthcare. Patricia used her connections and resources to open doors that had long been closed to minority medical professionals. Medical conditions can change who we are, Emily explained to the audience, but they can also reveal who we truly are through how we handle their aftermath. The impact of their story spread beyond Boston. Other hospitals began examining their own practices and biases. Medical schools invited them to speak about the importance of looking beyond surface judgments to understand the whole patient. After the conference, they met with young medical students who were inspired by their message. A Black student approached Emily with tears in her eyes. "Your story gives me hope," she said. "It shows that change is possible." Patricia had become a different kind of activist, using her influence to support diversity in medicine. She helped establish scholarships for minority medical students and worked to change hospital policies that created barriers for doctors of color. Their joint presentations always ended with the same message. Sometimes our greatest opponents become our greatest allies, and our worst moments lead to our best opportunities for growth. The medical community took notice. Research programs began studying the relationship between brain health and behavior more closely. Patricia's case became a teaching example in medical schools, demonstrating how underlying conditions could affect personality and actions. One evening, after another successful presentation, Emily and Patricia sat in a quiet cafe, reflecting on their journey. "Did you ever imagine we'd be here?" Patricia asked, stirring her tea. "Working together, helping others understand what we learned." Emily smiled. Sometimes the best lessons come from the hardest experiences. Their story continued to touch lives. A documentary filmmaker followed their work, capturing the ripple effects of their partnership. Hospitals across the country began implementing programs based on their recommendations. The most powerful part, Patricia often said in their presentations, is that Dr. Roberts chose to share this story. "She could have kept the truth about my tumor private, could have let people go on thinking I was simply a hateful person. Instead, she helped everyone understand that there's often more to behavior than we can see." Emily would then add, "And Mrs. Whittaker chose to use her experience to create positive change when she could have simply moved on with her life." Their message resonated because it offered hope, hope that hatred could be transformed, that understanding could triumph over prejudice, that the human capacity for change was greater than anyone imagined. The transformation went beyond their personal story. It sparked conversations about mental health, about judgment, about the importance of looking deeper when someone's behavior changes dramatically. As they concluded their speeches, they always shared their most important lesson. Compassion isn't just about helping those who are kind to us. It's about helping everyone who needs help, even those who have hurt us. Because sometimes the person who seems to be your enemy is fighting a battle you can't see. Their story became a testament to the power of forgiveness and understanding, showing that even the deepest wounds could heal when treated with compassion and wisdom. It proved that sometimes the most powerful transformations come from the most unexpected places, and that healing one person can lead to healing many more.